Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Iran and Russia say parties negotiating a revival of the 2015 nuclear deal have agreed to speed up efforts to bring the US and Iran back into compliance. The separate statements come after the third round of talks began in Vienna. At the end of the talks last week, the US and its European allies said serious differences still persisted despite making some progress in their indirect talks. Egyptian officials say the Palestinian Authority is planning to call off its first election in 15 years, slated for the 22nd of May. They cited Israel's refusal to allow voting in occupied East Jerusalem and splits in the Fatah party as the main reason behind possible postponement. They said President Mahmoud Abbas will announce the decision at a meeting of party leaders on Thursday. A shipment of medical supplies from the UK has arrived in India, where hospitals are facing a shortage of oxygen and beds amid a surge in the coronavirus infections. Germany has also decided to airlift oxygen and ventilators to India in coming days as the country's death toll approaches 200,000. In Pakistan, authorities have announced that no exams will take place until the 15th of June amid a surge in coronavirus cases and deaths. The country has so far registered 17,329 deaths and nearly 805,000 infections. Globally, there are more than 3.1 million deaths and around 148 million cases. In a tit-for-tat move, Ukraine says it will declare the Russian envoy in the port city of Odessa persona non grata. The two countries have already expelled a diplomat each after Russia accused a Ukrainian envoy of trying to obtain classified information. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has urged Turkish and Greek Cypriot parties to be creative as talks begin on the island's future after a 4-year hiatus. Guterres has invited foreign ministers of Turkey, Greece and Britain to attend the Geneva-based talks in an effort to resume peace negotiations. The Mediterranean island was split between a Greek Cypriot South and a Turkish Cypriot North in 1974. And in tennis, South Africa's Kevin Anderson and Spain's Alejandro Davidovich Fokina have advanced into the second round of the Australian Open. Anderson came from a set down to beat American Francis Tiafoe 4-6, 7-6 and 7-6, while Davidovich Fokina defeated compatriot Pablo Andujar 6-3, 4-6 and 6-1 to march ahead. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Iran and Russia say parties negotiating a revival of the 2015 nuclear deal have agreed to speed up efforts to bring the US and Iran back into compliance. The separate statements come after the third round of talks began in Vienna. In a tweet, the Iranian Foreign Ministry said an expert group will be formed with the aim of holding talks on the removal of US sanctions. Russia's ambassador to the UN Atomic Watchdog wrote on Twitter that all the participants are interested in the full restoration of the deal in its original form. At the end of the talks last week, the US and its European allies said serious differences still persisted despite making some progress in their indirect talks. The EU is chairing indirect talks between Iran and the US, which abandoned the deal 3 years ago and imposed sanctions on Iran. Egyptian officials say the Palestinian Authority is planning to call off its first election in 15 years, slated for the 22nd of May. They cited Israel's refusal to allow voting in occupied East Jerusalem and splits in the Fatah party as the main reason behind possible postponement. They said President Mahmoud Abbas will announce the decision at a meeting of the party leaders on Thursday. Palestinian analysts say Abbas could also benefit from cancelling the vote, in which his fractured Fatah party is expected to lose power and influence to Hamas. Hamas and other Palestinian parties have objected to any delay. Israeli police have clashed with Palestinians a day after the removal of barriers outside Jerusalem's Damascus Gate. The Israeli forces arrested several Palestinians who gathered at the East Jerusalem Plaza to celebrate the removal of barricades. Meanwhile, the Human Rights Watch says Israel is committing apartheid and is persecuting Palestinians. In a report, the international rights watchdog said Israel's actions amount to crimes against humanity. The watchdog called on the International Criminal Court to investigate the systematic discrimination against Palestinians. In a tit-for-tat move, Ukraine says it will declare the Russian envoy in the port city of Odessa persona non grata. The two countries have already expelled a diplomat each after Russia accused a Ukrainian envoy of trying to obtain classified information. Tensions have soared in recent weeks over a Russian military build-up near the Ukrainian border that raised alarm in both Kiev and in the West. Last week, Russia said it had begun returning the troops to their permanent bases. Russia says the actions by the US and the NATO alliance in Europe are contributing to an increased military threat. State media quoted Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu as saying that Moscow will act as it sees fit to ensure security at its border. Earlier in a phone call, French President Emmanuel Macron urged his Russian counterpart to reduce tensions with Ukraine. In a statement, the Kremlin said Vladimir Putin drew attention to provocative actions of Kiev. This comes days after Moscow ordered a withdrawal of some troops from its border with Ukraine. Russia says the Open Skies Treaty is on the verge of collapse. Head of the Russian delegation on arms control, Konstantin Gavrilov, said no unilateral concessions should be expected from Russia for the treaty. Gavrilov said the US and its allies blame Russia for the state of the pact, as if Washington never withdrew from it. He said Moscow is ready to discuss the concerns of the stakeholders, but only after the US returns. The US has withdrawn from the treaty after accusing Moscow of violating the pact and of selective implementation. The agreement establishes a program of unarmed aerial surveillance flights over the territories of the participants. In Myanmar, heavy fighting has erupted after an armed militia captured a military base near the Thai border. A spokesperson for the Karen National Union said the camp had been burned down. A Thai official in Mae Hong Son province said one person had been wounded during the fighting. This comes as the junta said it will positively consider ASEAN's suggestions on ending the turmoil. Meanwhile, anti-coup activists have resumed protests in Mandalay and Yangon. Activists say security forces have killed more than 750 civilians in the crackdown on protesters so far. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has urged Turkish and Greek Cypriot parties to be creative as the talks are set to begin on the island's future after a 4-year hiatus. Guterres has invited foreign ministers of Turkey, Greece and Britain to attend the Geneva-based talks in an effort to resume peace negotiations. The Mediterranean island was split between a Greek Cypriot South and a Turkish Cypriot North in 1974. The Greek Cypriot administration is internationally recognized as the Cyprus government, while the breakaway Turkish Cypriot is recognized only by Ankara. The conflict has stoked wider tensions between NATO members Turkey and Greece, including over hydrocarbon resources. The Turkish parliament has slammed US President Joe Biden's declaration that Armenian killings in 1915 constituted genocide. The parliament called on Biden to correct what it called his mistake by changing the remarks on the events of 1915. This comes a day after President Tayyip Erdogan urged Biden to reverse his declaration. Addressing a press briefing in Ankara, Erdogan said the wrong step will be detrimental to bilateral ties. Britain's Queen Elizabeth's aircraft carrier will lead a flotilla of Royal Navy ships through Asian waters on port visits to Japan and South Korea. The warships would carry out drills with forces from Japan, Australia, France and India, among others. In a statement, the British Embassy in Tokyo said the fleet would also be joined by vessels from the US and a frigate from the Netherlands. The Royal Navy says the ships will also stop in India and Singapore. The high-profile voyage is aimed at bolstering security ties in East Asia and comes amid tensions in the region. China has lodged a protest with Japan over its annual diplomacy report. The document expressed grave concerns about Beijing's military capabilities and maritime activities. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said the report hyped up the so-called China threat. At a news briefing, Wang Wenbin said the report smears China and interferes in the country's internal affairs. Beijing urged Tokyo to redress its mistake and to build stable relations with concrete actions. The United States says it will seek cooperation with China even as it competes with Beijing. At a press briefing, State Department spokesperson Ned Price termed the US-China bilateral relations multifaceted. Price said Washington needs to mobilize its resources and work with allies to compete with China on some fronts. However, he added, cooperation with Beijing in areas such as climate and Iran nuclear issue remains open. This comes a day after China vowed to step up its support for Russia amid tightening Western sanctions. South Korea has urged the North to implement inter-Korean agreements and step ahead for talks. Unification Minister Lee In-young made the remarks at the third anniversary of the historic 2018 summit. Lee says South Korea is willing to resume talks with the North anytime, anywhere, and on any issue. He reiterated that peace in the Korean Peninsula can only be realized through dialogue and cooperation. The Unification Minister expressed hope that Pyongyang will come out for talks at an early date. Inter-Korean exchanges and peace talks have stalled since the failure of a summit between the North and the US in 2019. In Afghanistan, at least 5 people have been killed by unidentified gunmen in eastern Nangarhar province. Local authorities say a former Taliban member also died in the incident. They said 3 others were wounded in the shooting. No group has claimed the responsibility for the attack yet. Meanwhile, Kabul says at least 10 Taliban have been killed in a rocket attack in Medan Wardak province. In a tweet, the Ministry of Interior said many others were wounded. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. A shipment of medical supplies from the UK has arrived in India, with the hospitals are facing a shortage of oxygen and beds amid a surge in coronavirus infections. Germany has also decided to airlift oxygen and ventilators to India in coming days as the country's death toll approaches 200,000. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 3.1 million lives and infected over 147 million people. More on the pandemic in this report.
With an exponential increase in global cases, inoculation challenges and fears of further economic contraction, the end to the COVID-19 pandemic seems nowhere in sight. India has called on its armed forces to help tackle the devastating crisis. Authorities say oxygen will be released from armed forces reserves, and retired medical personnel will join health facilities that are struggling under the strain of cases. WHO's chief scientist Soumya Swaminathan says the actual number of cases in India is being significantly underreported. Moscow says New Delhi will receive the first batch of Russia's Sputnik V vaccine on May 1st. Australia says it will suspend all direct passenger flights from India until May 15th. Meanwhile, the WHO says millions of children are at risk from other life-threatening diseases, mainly because COVID-19 has severely disrupted their regular immunization process.
The pandemic has caused several disruptions to immunization services around the world. New WHO data shows that as a result of COVID-19, 60 immunization campaigns are currently suspended in 50 countries.
Meanwhile, within a week of lifting a ban on Johnson & Johnson's vaccine, US CDC has warned people getting the shots to watch for blood clot symptoms. However, the US says it will start sharing up to 60 million doses of AstraZeneca's vaccine with other countries in coming weeks. Canada has announced to send the Army and Red Cross to its worst affected province, Ontario. Meanwhile, amid unprecedented spikes, Turkey has announced a complete nationwide full closure from April 29th until May 17th.
Avrupa'nın açılma sürecine girdiği bir dönemde
we have to bring down the number of our cases below 5,000 at a time when Europe entered a period of easing the restrictions. Otherwise, it will be inevitable for us to face the heavy consequences in every field, from tourism to trade and education.
Thailand has reported 15 deaths, setting a new daily record for the third time in 4 days, despite new shutdowns in Bangkok and other areas.
In Pakistan, authorities have announced that no examinations will take place in the country until the 15th of June amid a surge in the coronavirus cases and deaths. They've also banned tourism and suspended intercity and interprovincial transport for a period of 8 days starting from the 8th of May. The country has so far registered 17,329 deaths and nearly 805,000 infections since the first case was reported in February last year. More than 700,000 have recovered since then. An immunization drive is currently underway to protect people against the fatal disease. Pakistan has called for greater international solidarity to overcome the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says the crisis is far from over. Virtually addressing the 6 Asian countries Foreign Ministers Conference, Qureshi said all governments want to revive their economies. He added such fiscal space and liquidity cannot be done in isolation. Qureshi said Pakistan supports the 3 proposals put forward by China for regional cooperation. The foreign minister noted the countries are vulnerable to climatic changes and natural disasters. He added the pooling of resources and expertise would go a long way in the timely delivery of assistance to the affected areas. China, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh held the conference on fighting COVID-19. The Spanish Prime Minister has confirmed the killing of 2 Spanish journalists in an ambush on an anti-poaching patrol in Burkina Faso. 4 people, including 3 foreigners, went missing after an armed group attacked a convoy of security forces and expatriates in an eastern region on Monday. No one has claimed the responsibility for the attack. The government said it had not identified the assailants, whom it described the terrorists. At least 2 people have been killed and 27 others injured in Chad as demonstrators took to the streets demanding a return to civilian rule. A spokesman for the military council says security forces were attempting to contain the protesters. Police responded with tear gas as protesters burned tires in several neighborhoods of N'Djamena. The military council has banned protests, saying no demonstrations that could lead to disorder are allowed. The protests come as Chad's military council named a civilian politician Albert Brahimi as Prime Minister of transitional government. But opposition leaders have dismissed the appointment, saying it is not up to the military council to designate a premier. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron has condemned the treatment of protesters in Chad. In Nigeria, kidnappers have killed 2 more students they had abducted from a university in northwest Kaduna State. Last Tuesday, unknown gunmen had kidnapped 20 students along with 3 non-academic staff. Local authorities said the security agencies have recovered the bodies of the 2 students. Earlier, they had found 3 bodies in a nearby village. During the assault, a member of the Greenfield University staff was also killed. This is the 5th known attack on the school or college to kidnap officials and students for ransom since December. But the Nigerian authorities have repeatedly vowed not to pay ransom to the bandits. Saudi Arabia's King Salman bin Abdulaziz has invited the Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, to visit the kingdom. Riyadh and allies broke off ties with Doha in June 2017 but have agreed to re-establish relations with Qatar earlier in January. The Emir's office said Sheikh Tamim received the invitation from Saudi Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan during a reception in Doha. Qatar's foreign ministry said the 2 sides discussed the Gulf unity. Qatar's state media said they discussed bilateral relations and ways to strengthen them in all spheres. It said they also exchanged views on regional and international developments as well as on a number of issues of common interest. The United States and the European Union have rejected redrawing the Western Balkan borders. The idea was floated after an unofficial diplomatic note was circulated among the EU officials. U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price said changing borders would only increase regional tensions. EU chief spokesperson Eric Mamer said Brussels does not favor any geographical changes. The document proposed breaking up Bosnia and merging Kosovo with Albania. It also suggested incorporating parts of Bosnia into Serbia and Croatia to aid European integration. The diplomatic note has not been claimed by any country and could not be verified for authenticity. EU lawmakers have kicked off the last debate on the post-Brexit trade agreement between the European Union and Britain. This precedes a key vote that is expected to give the accord overwhelming approval. Speaking in Brussels, EU chief Ursula von der Leyen said Brussels will not hesitate from punishing London for breaching the deal. She said the trade and cooperation agreement will give the EU more leverage over the UK. The UK government has been accused of breaching its commitments in Northern Ireland and on fisheries. It was brought into force provisionally along with the rest of the trade deal in January ahead of the ratification. The US and the UK have imposed sanctions on a member of Guatemala's Congress over alleged corruption. In a statement, the U.S. Treasury said it blacklisted Congressman Felipe Alaus Lorenzana and a former Chief of Staff, Gustavo Adolfo Eloy Skembara. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the curbs support Guatemala's efforts to end corruption. In a statement, he said the move comes as part of Washington's commitment to support improved governance in Guatemala. The sanctions freeze any U.S. assets of the blacklisted people and bars Americans from dealing with them. Meanwhile, Britain also imposed sanctions against Lorenzana along with a Honduran congressman for facilitating bribes. Venezuela says its armed forces have suffered casualties in fighting with irregular Colombian armed groups in the past 72 hours. Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino says clashes took place in the west of the border town of La Victoria. In a statement, Padrino said the Venezuelan forces killed and captured many fighters of the armed groups. He accused the groups of seeking to export their narco-paramilitary model to Venezuela to destabilize the country. However, the defense minister did not specify the number of casualties to either side. Thousands of Venezuelans have crossed the border into Colombia since fighting in the western state of Apure broke out in late March. China has launched a Long March 6 carrier rocket, sending 9 commercial satellites into space. This was the 366th flight mission of the Long March rocket series. The rocket blasted off from the Taiyuan Satellite Launch Center in North China's Shaanxi province. State media said the satellites have entered their planned orbits. They will provide Shandong province with remote sensing services like land survey, forestry and disaster prevention. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. In Crimea, blooming peach gardens alongside the southern coast have become an excellent backdrop for a costume ball. Details in this report.
Although spring has been late this year and peach trees just began to bloom, they're as beautiful as ever. A costume ball is being held at the blooming peach gardens near Ternovka village in the Crimean Peninsula. Dozens of couples dance the waltz, square, mazurka, and other classic styles. Works by Johann Strauss, Pyotr Tchaikovsky, Wolfgang Mozart, and other famous classical composers were played for the participants. Organizers say they wanted to preserve the beauty of Crimean nature and ball dancing, which organically came in tune with each other through the event.
Australian researchers are attempting to reverse the decline of elusive species of platypus. The semi-aquatic animal is increasingly under threat from extreme weather events. What in this report?
It only takes a rustle and splash of an orange buoy floating on the Thorn River for these scientists to know they have found what they're looking for, the elusive platypus. Famed for its bill, webbed feet, and venomous spurs, the platypus is one of only 2 egg-laying mammals in the world. Many Australians have never seen one in the wild. The researchers capture the platypuses with nets, tranquilize them, and attach electronic tags. They take blood and urine samples, a biopsy for genetics, and cheek pouch and fur samples to gauge the platypus diet.
If we want to dive into the finer details of how the population is doing and tracking change over time, then we really need to try and catch the platypuses and have a close look first in terms of estimating the population size. You can't do that with the DNA. You have to go through the hard effort of catching and tagging and releasing and doing that over.
Researchers say rivers and creeks need to be protected and revegetated for a healthy population of the mammal, as a study last year found that platypus numbers have dropped as much as 30%. Their habitat has shrunk by more than a fifth in the last 30 years, but the scientists believe they can still save the animal.
With the platypus, we are, getting increasing evidence that they are declining, but I think we've got a really unique opportunity that if we intervene now, that we can really prevent those extinctions in the future, and hopefully the platypus will be around for many more generations.
Besides extreme weather, dams, land clearing, and diversion of waterways have also affected the population. Cattle have destroyed riverbanks critical for platypus burrows, while invasive animals, fishing nets, and plastic rubbish have also affected the species.
In other business updates, the Wall Street stocks have dropped at open as investors braced for a big batch of tech earnings at the start of the Federal Reserve's policy meeting. Shares of Tesla declined 4% even after the car maker posted a record net income of over $400 million. The indices of S&P 500 and Dow Jones Industrial Average were marginally low at open. Well, the Nasdaq Composite Index traded nearly 0.5% down. Meanwhile, the oil prices rose as OPEC Plus sources said the producer group will stick to existing plans to boost oil output slightly from May the 1st. In football, Leicester City have moved closer to Champions League qualification after they came from behind to beat Crystal Palace 2-1. The win leaves the Foxes in third place on the Premier League table with 62 points, 5 behind Manchester United. Wilfried Zaha fired Palace ahead in the 12th minute, but Timothy Castaigne equalised for the Foxes in early second half. Leicester's winner came in the 80th minute when Kelechi Iheanacho smashed home to complete the turnaround at King Power Stadium. The goal came as Iheanacho's 12th in the last 9 games. The Foxes are now 7 points clear of 4th placed West Ham, while Crystal Palace are 13th with 38 points. Bayern Munich have appointed Julian Nagelsmann as their new manager. In a statement, the club announced that RB Leipzig boss will join on a 5-year contract at the end of the season. Nagelsmann is one of the highest rated young managers in Europe. He led Leipzig to the Champions League semi-final last year. The German is set to take over on July the 1st and has cost the club more than $28 million in compensation. Nagelsmann became the youngest head coach in Bundesliga history after taking charge of Hoffenheim in February 2016. Now the weather situation from around the globe. And that is all for now. With the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.